This is an LA Times Studios podcast.
People have probably heard details. There's a lot of baby oil involved, sex objects, and they're always in these high-end hotel rooms, including the Trump Hotel, by the way, which $800 a night, by the way.
That seems pretty cheap for Sean Combs. But
Oh, yeah. But then again, there were the damage bills for the hotel rooms, which were quite shocking in some cases.
Hello and welcome to LA Crimes. I'm your host, Madison McGee. Today, I am joined by our wonderful guest and LA Times reporter, Richard Winton. Richard is back.
I'm here.
Thanks for being here. We've got a big one to talk about today. As you just mentioned before we started, a lot of things to remember because there's so much information about this. And it just seems like every day there's more and more to know about this case. Today, we're talking about the Sean Combs trial and what's happened thus far. Prosecution is about to rest their case, and we're moving on to defense. So we're going to get into what's going on up to now because it's been a lot.
There's a lot. There's been like nearly 30 witnesses for the prosecution over 6 weeks. We're talking a lot of information.
Yeah. So if you had to summarize this case in one word, what would it be?
Freak-offs.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, the whole case is basically boils down to coercive control is what the prosecution are basically alleging, that the entire Bad Boy entertainment was basically all about Sean Combs being able to control women and make them do what he wanted sexually. And that led to because he's used this whole enterprise, they're saying it's racketeering like the mob.
Wow. I mean, yeah. Before we get into sort of the details of the trial, I want to talk about the basics about how we got here. So who is Sean Combs in general in entertainment? Who is this guy?
So he starts off back in the day, we were talking decades ago, as like a hip-hop artist. But he's already becoming very corporate early on, bringing in a lot of other artists and starting to manage those artists and making a company. But he's also diversifying earlier than most people into, getting involved in the vodka business. He's getting involved in Sean John clothing. He's the first person who kind of breaks out into every sector, and his pile of cash is building up big. But at the same time, the federal government now that's basically alleging, hey, there's more to this. Behind the scenes, he's got these women he's controlling throughout this entire time, kind of making them sex slaves.
So how long were they sort of eyeing him from a distance before they jumped in and said anything?
Well, the interesting thing is this guy's been around prosecutions for a long, long time. Back in the day when he was younger, when J-Lo was his girlfriend, he was, prosecuted unsuccessfully. People have been eyeing him on and off for years. This case has probably got like 2 or 3 years of roots.
Wow. It's really interesting because it does seem like these things take a long time. And it's 2025 now. And literally not even 2 years ago, he received like an honor for like his contributions to the music entertainment industry. And it just seems like this all sort of like came out of nowhere.
Well, what happened is one of his girlfriend of 12 years basically decided she was going to sue him. And in that lawsuit, she laid out years and years and years of sexual abuse, what they term coercive control of her, controlling her money, videoing her in these freak-offs where she had to have sex with these other male hookers who they hired. There was drug usage, and in her words, repeated beatings. There's a case where she starts seeing this other performer, Kid Cudi. He finds out. It's alleged he set light to Kid Cudi's car. He broke into his house. Basically, after he found out, he came back and beat her and stomped on her at one point. I mean, so we've got this whole scenario of like abuse going over years. But there's more to this. His defense is, look, I may have to be a domestic violence abuser, but I'm not a racketeer. I'm not a sex trafficker, because they're charging him with federal crimes, which basically put him away for the rest of his life.
Yeah, it seems like a really interesting choice, because we see this a lot in other trials where if it's really hard to prove, sometimes they'll lessen the charges so that they make sure they get the guy. This feels like they're really reaching for the stars, because if he has a good defense, he might not get away. I don't know. It just seems like he might not be put away for racketeering. And then what happens?
That's why they've spent a lot of time trying to build various elements. They didn't just have his former girlfriend, Cassie Ventura, testify to the abuse she had. They tried to show what happened with money, what happened with prostitutes, how it was all done, how the organization was involved. It wasn't just Coombs doing stuff, supplying drugs, procuring men, etc. It was the entire corporation was built up around that. And that's why they're trying to show there's an enterprise. Yeah, and it's not an easy case to convince. But they have other precedent. They have prior cases. We had R. Kelly, very similar kind of thing with a lot of the similar evidence. And so there was a cult case in New York, similar evidence. In fact, his lawyer represented that individual in that case. So they know that in federal court, trying someone, the feds generally win. Yeah. It takes a real play to beat them. And yeah, his defense, they're going all out. They only have to squeak something out. But the problem for Coombs here is very much, he's charged with racketeering, sex trafficking, and prostitution. Just one of these is bad enough for him.
Okay, so tell me a little bit. The trial has been going on for 6 weeks. They thought it was going to be an 8 to 10 week, which now it's probably going to be a little bit longer if defense takes also 6 weeks. How long do you think this is going to go?
I actually think it'll still go about 9 to 10 weeks.
Okay.
Defense won't be as long, I don't think, as people think.
Okay.
I mean,
Why?
Defense doesn't generally have to put on as much evidence unless they choose to put Coombs up there, which would be the ultimate play, which would be very, very, very rare. Rarely does anyone go on the witness stand in their case. And if he does, it'll suggest that he thinks he's already down, which would be very interesting. But we've already seen in this case, we've seen at least 3 women, 2 former girlfriends, including Cassie Ventura, the best known, go on and allege sexual assaults, an assistant alleged sexual assaults. We have 2 girlfriends who've alleged sexual assaults. Then we've seen a ton of people who work for him talk about the control, the coercion, the threats. We had Kid Cudi go on there and talk about how he came to his house when he wasn't there and broke in.
I watched the recaps of that.
Yeah. So we saw, Kid Cudi's car mysteriously burst into flames. His dog Walker calls him and says, "Oh, your car's on fire in the driveway." This is right after, basically he's found out he's run foul of Coombs.
That's so interesting. So tell me a little bit about his defense attorney. He's already represented someone, but they didn't get away with it. So why is he the choice for this defense?
He's a choice because he understands these kind of cases. In the end, here's the problem you face with. You need someone who can defend you in federal court in this high level of case and the complexities. So he has a whole team of lawyers here, some who've specialized in doing this kind of thing in federal court. We also have Mark Garagos' daughter as one of the defense attorneys. And, so we have a whole bunch of kind of different players trying to chip away. And what we've seen in the trial is the prosecution will put on the mound of evidence, and then what the typically, repeatedly, every day you see is the cross-examination where they try and erode. For instance, a lot of the women, they try and show, well, after you said he beat you and he did this and he whatever, then you went back to him. And you see this line repeatedly, are you really the victim here or are you a participant almost? They're trying to suggest that these women participated in the scheme. Sometimes there's also, like with Cassie's case, they tried to show that she sometimes procured the male prostitutes for the freak-offs. So basically they're trying to undermine the idea that they're the victims as much as part of the whole goings-on. How can there be a scheme if they're kind of in it?
Yeah. So there's been some big names associated with this case, obviously, but one that was sort of dropped right before the trial and then he's been sort of not spoken about since is Jay-Z. What happened there?
Everything mentioned involving Jay-Z has taken place outside of this federal courtroom. he has never been alleged by the feds to be involved in any form. There have been civil litigation, most of which is crumbled, alleging that. It's actually noticeable. The feds here have drawn a very narrow victim list here. Basically, they're presenting 3 women as victims. They were originally going to present 4, but they presented 3. They have not alleged, as the civil suits have alleged, there are minors involved, males involved. All that stuff is all in civil cases. None of that's come into this courtroom. Jay-Z, no one has made any allegation which has been substantiated against him or anyone connected to him. In fact, no other celebrity has actually been accused of anything which has been substantiated at all.
That's so interesting. Richard and I will be back to talk more about what's been going on the first few weeks of the trial in just a moment. You know when a shirt just becomes your go-to? That's what happened when I picked up a few new pieces from Quince. They're the first things I reached for in my closet. Lightweight, comfortable, and always on point. Quince has all the things you actually want to wear, like organic cotton silk polos, European linen beach shorts, and comfortable pants that work for everything from backyard hangs to nice dinners. The best part? Everything with Quince is priced 50 to 80% less than what you'd find at similar brands. By working directly with top artisans and cutting out the middlemen, Quince gives you luxury pieces without the crazy markups. Elevate your closet with Quince. Go to quince.com/LAcrimes for free shipping on your order and 365-day returns. That's QUINCE.com/LAcrimes to get free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/LAcrimes. Welcome back to LA Crimes. I'm joined by Los Angeles Times reporter Richard Winton, and we are talking about the first few weeks of the Sean Combs trial. Richard, tell me a little bit about the key players in this, the prosecution, the defense, and where this trial is taking place.
So basically, this trial is taking place in Manhattan. It's basically New York federal prosecutors. Generally in this country, they're the people you don't want to face. That's where a lot of high-profile prosecutions occur. Mr. Combs' business was essentially run from that area, so essentially that's where they in the end, they started working with the Homeland Security investigations on this case from very early on, built up a case against Sean Combs. He has a legal team of various attorneys from New York, led by a guy called Mark Anafalo, who is basically the lead defense attorney. He's previously represented a cult leader in a similar case, which the prosecution succeeded in. There's one of a number of similar kind of racketeering, sex trafficking cases which have been brought about against high-profile individuals. So these cases, this is one of the most high-profile courts in the land. You know, the federal prosecutors in Southern District do not mess around.
Yeah. Wow. So the trial kicked off in late May, and where do we stand right now?
Right now, we are at the stage of basically the prosecution's pretty much done. They're just mopping up here with like bits of like the ending of this case. There's been a lot of reading of text messages between Combs or the women and his chief of staff. So they're discussing sort of machinations of hiring people and covering things up and why he's abusing me and just all these text messages. And then the jury also got to hear, but no one else did, and there were headphones like we're wearing right now. Basically, they got to watch the freak-off tapes, the actual tapes.
And they watched them just in the courtroom.
Yeah, you have to do that because it's all part of the record. But the judge didn't want that to be in the public circulation and even in the sort of press circulation. So they watched these, segments because Combs recorded they eventually seized many of these recordings of these women having sex with all this baby oil. I mean, people have probably heard details. There's a lot of baby oil involved, sex objects, and they're always in these high-end hotel rooms, including the Trump Hotel, by the way. Which $800 a night, by the way.
That seems pretty cheap for Sean Combs. But
oh, yeah. But then again, there were the damage bills for the hotel rooms, which were quite shocking in some cases.
Wow.
And then, of course, we have the most famous incident, which is the one that was the incidental content Intercontinental Hotel in Los Angeles, where many people may have seen, thanks to CNN, the video of Combs attacking Cassie in the hallway.
Because federal courts are different, who is sitting in this courtroom every day?
There's a small number of reporters. There are members of the public who queue up to get in, and there's and then there's Combs' family often's there. There's, and then there's obviously the jurors and the alternates. So federal court is a very controlled setting. It is, there's no cameras, no recording. It's the most controlled environment in the court system. I mean,
they're really keeping it tight. So tell me a little bit about some of the key witnesses in the trial and how they relate to Sean Combs and why the public takes such interest in these particular witnesses.
The big witnesses really have been the assistants and ex-girlfriends. The biggest witness being the first main witness that everyone, if you have any inkling about this trial, is the singer Cassie Ventura, who goes by Cassie Ventura Fine. She was one of his artists for many years, but more importantly, his girlfriend for 12 years. And she basically alleged in a civil suit, which he settled for more than $20 million, that he was subject to years of sexual abuse, all kinds of coercion and control. And there was numerous days of her testifying to horrible beatings and being forced to take drugs and, participate in these multiple person sex sessions where he would watch and being stomped on. Probably the worst incident seems to be she was stomped on by him, which she's basically said was worse than the hotel incident people have seen videoed, where he basically finds out she's been with Kid Cudi.
So that settlement, does that play a factor into this trial as any admission of responsibility?
Jurors heard it. It can read both ways as well. She also took the money. I mean, the defense also probably likes to portray that as motive. I mean, early on, even before this trial was underway, the defense team were like, yeah, and she also before actually suing, was saying she was going to publish a book. And it was the rights of the book were for sale, which implies some things.
Sure.
So they've obviously going to always, when money is passed to someone who is the victim of a crime before a criminal proceeding, defense teams tend to portray that as they were after the money.
Right. So as this trial has unfolded, what have been the biggest arguments made by the prosecution that we've seen?
Essentially, their argument comes down to the whole enterprise of Bad Boy was all about coercive control and fulfilling his needs with these women. There were new women all the time, but essentially the model was always the same. Get them to do whatever sex acts he wanted, pay them, fund their life, pay their rent. For instance, we just had a woman on the stand whose rent was being paid till basically right before, even now it's being paid. $10,000 rent in New York a month, So basically control of their entire life, often they're contracted artists, everything was controlled. Basically, the prosecution argument is he used his entire enterprise to fulfill his sexual needs. And this went way beyond them just being abuse victims. This is coercion. It's basically racketeering and sex trafficking, which are these huge federal crimes, which,
right.
When people created racketeering, they think of the mob and, guys in restaurants or, these kind of, Martin Scorsese style characters. But nowadays, this racketeering law is being used more in this kind of sense.
Yeah, it's just so sad. So we've heard a lot in sort of entertainment news about the white parties. The white parties are like an entertainment sort of nod. Everyone knows what these are. Everyone heard of them. And now they're coming up at trial. And, you see celebrities going, yeah, I went, but I had no idea what was going on.
It actually, what we've learned during the trial, reality check is the freak-offs and all that are just way beyond the white parties or whatever. This is all a different secret underworld with Combs where these women and coercive control and all the parties, whatever sort of bad behavior they didn't paled in comparison to what we're hearing in the trial. This is not the same stuff at all. We're talking about incidents where they've alleged, like like at one point he's accused of dangling a friend of one of his ex-girlfriends off the balcony of a hotel, basically. So, this is the more serious stuff. What we found out during the trial is that all that stuff is just kind of the show and tell, but this was the real stuff. There was an underworld, a world which only a certain number of people more inside the organization knew about. There were hints of it in the other world, but there was just a different world.
Yeah. So as someone who's really been paying attention to this and knew a little bit about it going in and then obviously learning more about it as it's happening, is there anything that really stuck out to you or was super surprising that you didn't think you would hear during the trial?
I think I'm not that surprised by what we've heard because to bring this case, they have to have a lot of evidence. What I am surprised is that they were able to recover video still. They were able to recover text years later because you'd figure if you were doing this kind of stuff, you'd be getting rid of things really well. But there is an element of, they tried to show, for instance, at the famous Intercontinental Hotel beating tape, how he basically paid off the security people to buy the video. So that's been part of the whole, look, he's a criminal, it's a racketeering thing. Look, when he knew he was in trouble because that tape was there and he knew the cops could start asking questions, he went in and paid thousands and thousands of dollars in cash, literally the old payment, literally under the table, to have them, what he thought was get rid of the only copy of the tape, take out on the server.
After the break, Richard and I will keep talking about what's to come with this trial and what it'll take to get a conviction. Welcome back to LA Crimes. I'm joined by Richard Winton, Los Angeles Times reporter, who has been covering the Sean Combs trial. I'm curious, now that the prosecution is sort of wrapping up, what you think the defense is going to start with and what angle they're going to take as they move into their side.
I think the defense has got to quickly try and erode the credibility of some of these witnesses with contradictory information, particularly information which shows they were more participants than victims, and that there was no, and then some extent show that the enterprise was so disorganized that it was all just so the personal bizarre behaviors of Sean Combs that it wasn't a racketeering. He was just a strange guy with these strange fetishes and serious abuse issues, but he wasn't this super criminal. He was just weird. I mean, this guy's obviously got a lot of things wrong with him, and PR, their PR, they don't care about PR. This is about not being in prison for the rest of your life. So now it's all just like show that this is not some big proper scheme. He's just this weird guy with bad relationships, and these people kind of participated in this sort of crazy world they lived in.
Do you know of any key witnesses they're going to bring in that could really change the game for their case?
We don't really truly know at this point how they're going to play their witnesses. I mean, they just list a lot of people and then you just see. But we get the inklings that prove the cross-examination. It's mostly about showing he didn't really have control. There were plenty of times when the victims could have walked away. They've been trying to show that, they had these opportunities to walk away. They didn't walk away, that scenario. So, sometimes they would seemingly be trying to please him by arranging a freak off, So why, if they're being under so much control, or there were times when they tried to show that, say, Cassie had given some order to someone else, or they try and show, so they may bring in people who kind of can show that instead of being like the victim, they were like the lieutenant. That's the best way of describing it, like a right hand to Combs more than the victim.
Yeah, this seems like, for as complicated as all the details are and the ins and outs of who's involved and what happened, this really does come down to coercive control being, if they can prove that, then all of the rest falls together really well. But if that's the big key in this case.
Yeah, I mean, it's the key. The other thing you always got to remember, juries sit up there. You just need one to not convict. Now, would they retry him? Probably, but the reality is they just need one not to convict. So at this stage, I suspect they're not thinking it's not guilty verdict for them, but what they do think is they can totally tie up this jury and then possibly, undermine their case, because they're probably targeting some of their questions, which to the jurors who they think are the ones who are going to be sympathetic to Coombs.
So do you think anyone after this ends is going to suffer consequences, or are they going, if he gets convicted, are they going to leave it at that, not try to implicate anyone else? Just
be clear, they've given people have tried to take the Fifth during the proceedings, and they've immediately given them immunity, making it clear that Coombs is the absolute target. I mean, many of his staffers and people who kind of wavered about what they're going to say were given immunity because he's the Mr. Big. But likelihood, if he's convicted here, of course, there's going to be hundreds of lawsuits.
And are those civil suits against him?
Yes, there are just numerous civil suits, the quality of which I cannot tell to you. There may be some of them, but what we would see if he was convicted, we would see a much more greater chance of success, and those hundreds of millions he may possess will no longer be his.
What happens in this case because it's federal? Will he have to pay anything back for?
Well, the money is kind of beside the point in his terms, as like you can't buy years. Here are the questions. If he's convicted, which ones of the charges would he be convicted of? Some of them carry enormous sentences which are just beyond his lifespan. And so if he gets convicted of those, then he'll be gone forever. The money's beside the point. But in the end, it would be civil cases which would deprive him of any of his money, which, he may, I don't know how it'll work out. Some of it may be settled. I mean, some of those cases may be spurious. We don't, it would take years to resolve all these civil cases against him.
Yeah. Well, I think that's all we have time for in today's episode, but we should definitely bring you back and do an update once the defense wraps up. But thank you so much, Richard, for joining me today. This was really interesting to hear from someone who's really deeply covering this case.
Yeah, I mean, this case is just the span and scope of it. It stretches from, New York to Miami to Los Angeles. This is a New York trial where a lot of evidence is being discussed about things which happened in Los Angeles.
Yeah, it's intense. Well, thank you so much. That's it for LA Crimes. If you like this show, subscribe on Apple Podcasts or by going to latimes.com/podcast bonus. That's latimes.com/podcast bonus. You'll gain access to this week's bonus episode where Richard and I talk about the updates to the Matthew Perry ketamine case. And that's it for me. I'll see you next week.